actually, it makes me angry because the kids just have no
Right.
chance. Like I have an uphill battle alone, and that's why I literally can't have like Instagram on my phone anymore.
Yeah. It's
And
dangerous.
the kids have absolutely no chance. Like you said, their brains aren't fully developed. They're
Mhm.
undermyelinated. They're highly seeking dopamine from their environment. That's how we develop as
Right.
humans. And that's why, I didn't know until this year that children actually let like 50%, up to 50% more blue light into their
Yes.
eyes. And it's like you think about why that is the case biologically. Well, it's because they need more dopamine to go and seek
Yeah.
things and actually map out their
Yeah.
environment. They want that drive biologically because that's how they're going to
Right.
learn. And we don't need that as much when we're fully grown adults because we've kind of gone through that process. We've mapped out the reality. But the problem is now, instead of, of course, the blue light from the sun, which is highly dispersed and it's like this grandiose
Right. It's
environment and
balance.
it's all kind of
Yeah.
distributed, it's a single device in their
Right.
hands. So now you've changed reality from being the entire environment to just a handheld device in front of them. And that's going to create a level of attachment that I don't think we have words to describe how strong
Right.
that is. We only have the tantrums from, after taking it away to really bring into perspective how strong that pull has on our children.
I think instinctively as adults, as parents and grandparents, we know that children should not have devices glued to their faces 24/7. And as a mom myself, I do my best to keep my 3-year-old completely away from screens at this point. And my teenager has a lot of limits around the way that she accesses technology, the time, and all of that. But when you look at how the world is changing and how children are going to have to learn to use technology at some point, I know there's only so long that I can shield my son from this. That's why I was really excited to have this conversation with Tristan from Daylight to talk about this issue as a whole. So we really go through and discuss how technology is impacting children, our hormones, and their development, and some potential solutions. Now, Tristan has just come out with a new product for children. And if you're interested after listening to this episode in checking it out, you can use the word Sarah Kleiner as a discount code to save $75 on this device. And this is only going to be through Black Friday. So if something you're interested in, great. If not, no big deal. I think this is just an important conversation that we need to have together in talking about technology and the use of safer technology for our children. So I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the Evolving Wellness Podcast, where circadian biology and quantum biology meet nutrition, lifestyle, hormones, health, and everyday conversations. I'm your host, Sarah, board certified in applied quantum biology by the American Naturopathic Medical Board and certified in nutrition by the National Academy of Sports Medicine. This is just a quick little reminder that you'll never hear a guest on this podcast whose every stance I agree with. And that's the point. These are conversations and not consultations. The information shared here is for information and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the guidance of a qualified, trusted professional for all of your personal health needs. If you want more of my content, including my free long-form articles with citations, free ebooks, membership group with more access to me and my circadian app that helps you integrate light into your life seamlessly, make sure to visit www.sarahkleinerwellness.com. Thank you so much for listening and enjoy the podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I have a friend of mine, Tristan, here, and we're going to talk about kids' health, eye health, screens, and I mean, it's kind of inevitable these days that kids have to be on devices to some extent. So we're going to deep dive into all of that. So Tristan, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sarah. Exciting topic as always. And yeah, especially for you and your audience, I feel like kind of the folks who understand this and really what we're prioritizing at Daylight.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
thanks for having me.
of course. And I think that there's a lot of people that listen that have kids and grandkids, and all of us with kids or grandkids are concerned about our kids being on these devices, I mean, for a multitude of reasons. Number one, there's a safety issue with the apps, the myopia that happens with so much blue light exposure, the non-native EMF. I mean, where do we even start with this conversation?
It's really a challenge,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's extremely inconvenient that technology is not good
Mm-hmm.
for us, that it's harmful, because we use it to do pretty much everything nowadays. But I think it's even more kind of tricky as a
Mm-hmm.
parent raising a child in this world, because this wasn't a problem ever before. And like even when I grew up, like I didn't get a smartphone until I was 16 or 17. Yeah, like computers and TVs existed when I was a kid, but it was a lot easier to manage the expectations because society wasn't so enthralled with their
Right.
devices. It wasn't literally attached to our hip for everything. It was kind of just a tool, and then used for entertainment. But there's a big difference, in my opinion, between watching
Yeah.
TV as a child and using an iPad, because of the distance, because of the fact that this is an individual, like handheld device. And really, what's resulted in that kind of iPad kid trend that's so alarming to parents, to me, to everyone, is that it's creating a completely distorted reality for these children. And you see that when you take it away from them.
Yeah, it's really scary to see how kids, they have so many behavior issues these days. I think I was telling you when we chatted offline previous to me, my sister is a public school second grade teacher, and out of a class of 20 children, half of them have either ADHD or autism, some sort of learning disability, ranging from completely nonverbal all the way to just dyslexic. I mean, but literally half of the kids in that class have some sort of issue. And she, as a teacher, is just supposed to figure out how to teach them. But it wasn't like that when I was growing up. I mean, maybe we were kids, we're crazy, but we didn't have the extent of the issues that the kids today have. And I do believe a lot of that is also our food, our water, the air, unnecessary medical interventions. But I think that the screens are playing into that in a way that people are just conveniently ignoring, because it's easy to park a kid on a device. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. An alarming statistic for me is that 15% of kids in public school are on some special education
Mhm.
plan now. 15. And you're saying an example where it's half the class. I mean, even 15%, like that's
Yeah,
insane. When I was in school, it was like one or two kids in the whole grade out
yeah,
of hundreds. And now it's double digits. It's the norm. My sister is a second grade teacher, and she has an example as well. Like I think 30 to 40% of her kids are on these
yeah. The
individualized plans.
IEPs.
And you know yeah, the IEP is exactly. And the rate, we know the rates of ASD and everything have been skyrocketing the past 2 decades, and everything you mentioned, right? The environmental factors. But then what happens when you give these children at a very young age screens and
Right.
devices? In my opinion, it's not only exacerbating the issue, but I think it's further deepening the mitochondrial
Yep.
dysfunction and their ability to develop as children. And that's going to happen for any kid. But if they're already in a kind of worse off or highly sensitive state, then it's going to be an even greater impact. And we're only kind of just getting like to understand what these end outcomes and end effects are, because the smartphone era only started around 10 years ago. And it wasn't really until COVID where this even accelerated
Yeah.
even more. So we're very fresh into this science experiment as a society of handing our children at very, very young ages technology. And we already see the negative
Yeah.
repercussions in a couple
Yeah.
years. So what does that mean to the longer term outcomes? That's the real
Yeah.
scary part, is what happens when these kids who are raised on iPads are 25 to
Yeah.
30. And I think the answer is a whole lot of physical and mental health issues to a degree that we've never seen
Agree.
before.
It's pretty scary. It's funny. I just did an article that showed a study that was done just recently that in 2010, I guess this is when the smartphones really became widely available because there was a cost issue and not everyone could get them. But in 2010, that was kind of a pivotal year where everyone had access to a smartphone, and they really did away with a lot of incandescents and made everything LED. That year, there was a marked difference of women no longer cycling, having their menstrual cycle with moon cycles any longer. That
I
isn't that
saw that.
wild?
Yeah. It's not a surprise, I
No, I
guess,
wasn't
right?
shocked at all. I was just like, yeah, of course, because everyone's keeping their phones in their faces at night. But then you think about, how is that going to impact all these girls coming up? What's that going to do to their hormones? Are already struggling because of our food and like all the other things I've mentioned. And now we're going to put in this melatonin disruptor, and it's a master hormone that does so much for cancer prevention, for menstrual cycle regulation, for fertility. We already have crises in all of these areas already. And now we're going to just accelerate those things. So the implications are just far reaching when we look at it that way.
Yeah, exactly. And basically, there's all these up and to the right graphs, we like to call them. And Jonathan Haidt from the Anxious Generation wrote a lot about this, specifically for teenagers. That, yeah, right in 2010 is when the smartphone era started. It really, took off in kind of 2013 to
Mm-hmm.
2015 in terms of, pretty much everyone above the age of 12
Yeah.
having one, and you see the rates of depression, anxiety, suicide, all of that stuff just skyrocketed with teenagers. But something that he didn't really write a ton about because it wasn't even that fresh is the even younger
Mm,
generation. And this problem is bad because you just know that screen time is not great for
right.
children. But then you actually go and look at the research, and it's even more alarming, right? There is concrete evidence in mainstream research that showcases like how problematic screen time is for young children. And the pediatric societies, they even recommend like
Yeah.
absolutely no screen time, like under
Mm-hmm.
2 years old, and as minimal as possible for like 2 to 4. But still that doesn't
No.
happen, and the increased risks of ADHD criteria, developmental delays, language delays, metabolic health, myopia, like it's all directly associated with screen time. And the younger the age and the longer the duration per day, the risks just keep
Yeah.
increasing in percentage. So it's crazy that this is the reality, and everyone kind of
Yeah.
knows about it, but they feel guilty and don't really have a good solution. And this is what we end up doing
Man,
regardless of that kind of
it's tough.
awareness.
And I know I'll get people that say, "Hey, you want to watch my kid?" I have really two tough kids. My son was up at 5 o'clock this morning. That he doesn't usually do that. He usually sleeps pretty well, but it's like, man, you get up at 5 a.m. with a kid and they're just running and torturing the dog and just getting into everything. And it would be so much easier if I just handed him an iPad so he could just sit and just park him on the couch so I could have a little coffee, have some breakfast, have a moment to myself. Without trying to have he's sticking his fingers in my eyes and in my mouth. It's a fun little game. And I'm like, dude, you have no chill, I get it. It's tough, but I see these viral videos going around of kids that they started giving them an iPad when they were babies, and now they're trying to detox them. I don't know if you've seen any of these on like TikTok or I don't go on TikTok, but on Instagram, they're trying to detox these babies off of iPads, and they're like 15 months old, 16 months old, and the kids are just epically screaming, melting down because they're so addicted to these devices already at this young age. And it's kind of terrifying to see that.
It's not only terrifying, it's really just tragic,
Yeah.
I would say, because yeah,
Child
we're talking about the
abuse,
most.
honestly.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, it is really, and it's unknowingly, and it's kind of, as you mentioned, as a parent, it's really hard, and it is nice to have something that can quiet them down for a little bit, and 10 minutes even could be a lifesaver as a
Mhm.
busy mom or a dad. But I think the realization now that this does have such a traumatic impact on their
Mhm.
development and on their psyche and on their neural circuitry is really obvious. So at this point, everyone knows that
Yeah.
it's a problem. And I think a lot more parents are diligent, especially under the ages of 2. But there still comes the challenge
Yep.
now. And what blew my mind and kind of why we started focusing on this even more heavily in a shorter time frame at Daylight was I talked to a bunch of superintendents in New Hampshire, more and more teachers, more and more parents. I didn't realize that they were giving kids Chromebooks as early as kindergarten and first
Yeah.
grade in a lot
Yeah.
of these schools because during COVID, that was the only way. Like virtual learning was mandatory. So now
Everything is
these states
on.
and public
Like, to go to
schools,
school, you have to have
yeah,
some sort of a device to keep up and do the homework and do the
exactly.
lessons. They're not used. That's what's terrifying to me. That's why we're definitely not going into that system with my son. It was decided before I got pregnant that he will not be going into that system. But yeah, what do you do? You know?
Yeah, you can be as deliberate as you like as a parent, hold off till they're 4 or 5 years old for any
Yeah.
introduction and then do really supplemental. But then it's like, okay, they go to school when they're 6 or 7 and they're on it all day long. So it really is a challenge. And not everyone has the luxury to homeschool or private school. So I really do feel for these
Mm-hmm.
parents. But what's even more kind of dumb is talking to these teachers and superintendents, they know the issues better than anyone. Like I had this presentation up on blue light and flicker and all that stuff and biological sensitivity of children, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we
Yeah.
get it." I didn't even present a single slide, and they're like, "Yeah, the kids are not well," and I was like, "Well, tell me about it." And they kind of just went through. They're like, since we started giving them screens and devices in kindergarten, first grade, they don't know how to have communication. They don't know how to have social skills. They're very enthralled on the screens. It's clear that the at home environment is also an issue. And they're just not, they're not really kids
Mm-hmm.
anymore. They're kind of just so wrapped up in this digital world that they don't look you
Yeah.
in the eye. They just very kind of passive, and it's a shame. And the teachers and superintendents are
Yeah.
concerned, but they don't really have a solution either because they've kind of
They're
already
bought in.
opened up
Yeah.
Pandora's box, and that's where we're at now. So there's no going backwards. And as a parent, you're kind of like damned if you do and damned if you don't. So what is the way
Right.
forward? And that's the key question.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's so much money. Again, our kids are being bought and paid for by big tech, and there's other interests in there as well, I'm sure. So how in the world? And one thing that you brought up, these kids are going to have to learn how to use technology. So as much as I want to shield my son from technology, and we're not going to do, he doesn't have an iPad, and we're not going to do the screens, and he will have to learn how to use technology to function in the modern world, because it's the way that everything's going. So you have to get them involved in this system in some way so they can still function. Like, what does a parent or a grandparent or someone who wants to help the children actually do in this situation?
Yeah, right. Like so much of what we've learned, our audiences, community, it's all online. I mean, it's brilliant. It's wonderful. I mean, Daylight wouldn't exist if we didn't, we launched on Twitter. We didn't have like a storefront and all that stuff. And
Right.
the internet is magical in a sense. Computers are magical, and they really were invented to augment the human capability to the highest degree. That's what it originally was intended for. And no one ever thought, of course, we'd be walking around with these things in our pockets all day long and giving them to our kids at such early
Mhm.
ages. But now that we do, we have really the universe's power, knowledge, access to everything at our fingertips. But because of the way they're designed and the business model and really just economic structure of society today, we end up just being consumed by
Mhm.
them because of that fact and because we are the
Mhm.
product itself. And it's a frustrating realization because they are supposed to be
Right.
tools and you can learn so much, but it's so hard to have that mental discipline, especially in 2025, because it's just so good. The form factor is so hard to overcome. The algorithm's so hard to
Mm-hmm.
overcome. Literally every system from, people always harp on social media, but at least social media, you like are knowingly being kind of manipulated, and everything is super short time frame. It, but even your email, everything the way it's set up right now, I have like 20 tabs
Oh,
open. Do you know how easy it would be for like a Google or software to just like minimize the realization that there's all these tabs and enhance the perspective of the end user to be more productivity
mm-hmm.
focused? There's so much they could
Mm-hmm.
do, but in reality, they don't want you to just be some like really productive worker. They want you to go to other websites while you're working and get ads and spend money. They want you to be
Mm-hmm.
distracted, because that's kind of how it's all
Yeah.
set up. It's all set up for consumerism. And it's just the unfortunate reality of kind of like a whole fiat economy that we're in. But it's almost more sad because we all know
Yeah.
it and we really can't
Yeah,
do
we
much
know.
about it.
I know when I'm doom scrolling. That's what we call it, doom scrolling. We don't call it pleasure scrolling. It's it's doom scrolling because it's just probably going to end to me, spending money with FedEx or UPS out front. Like, ah, dang, what did I just do? Because I was trying to just unwind a little bit. And as an adult, you can be more conscious about it. I definitely set boundaries with myself, set rules with myself, make a conscious effort not to do this. But my brain is fully formed. I'm 46 years old. Like I can take a look back and say, let's just take a step back, kids, I don't think they have that. Their executive functioning is not on board yet, to be able to say, wow, this is making me crazy. I feel like a lunatic, and parents will report it, especially kids like my daughter. We take her device away. Like we put her iPad on red. We have it on airplane mode. She's just downloaded all of her songs, but we have to take that away sometimes because she'll get really amped up on the music. And I'm like, oh, that's it, um, take a break, go outside. It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, that's where it's really, actually it makes me angry because the kids just have no
Right.
chance. Like I have an uphill battle alone, and that's why I literally can't have like Instagram on my phone anymore.
Yeah. It's
And
dangerous.
the kids have absolutely no chance. Like you said, their brains aren't fully developed, they're
Mhm.
undermyelinated, they're highly seeking dopamine from their environment. That's how we develop as
Right.
humans, and that's why I didn't know until this year that children actually let like 50%, up to 50% more blue light into their
Yes.
eyes. And it's like you think about why that is the case biologically. Well, it's because they need more dopamine to go and seek
Yeah.
things and actually map out their
Yeah.
environment. They want that drive biologically because that's how they're going to
Right.
learn. And we don't need that as much when we're fully grown adults because we've kind of gone through that process. We've mapped out the reality. But the problem is now, instead of, of course, the blue light from the sun, which is highly dispersed and it's like this grandiose
Right. It's
environment and
balance.
it's all kind of
Yeah.
distributed, it's a single device in their
Right.
hands. So now you've changed reality from being the entire environment to just a handheld device in front of them. And that's going to create a level of attachment that I don't think we have words to describe how strong
Right.
that is. We only have the tantrums from, after taking it away to really bring into perspective how strong that pull
Is yeah.
has on
It's
our children.
emotionally distressing. And kids like my daughter, we've done some genetic testing. I know some people that listen, they don't believe in genes. There's got to be a word for it or a label for it. Maybe we don't agree on semantics, but she burns through her dopamine quicker than the average person. She has mutations where, and most kids with autism burn through dopamine at a much higher rate. So they'll continue to seek that at an even higher rate than a typical kid, and we've got all these kids with neurodivergence or ADHD and autism, and I think they all have similar mapping. And so I think for these kids, it's even more dangerous for them to be on these sorts of devices.
They're the most
Yeah.
sensitive, right? They're so sensitive, which can be a
Yes.
superpower, which is cool. I mean, I feel like that in general. But yeah, it's astounding, and I think that's really the starting place is to realize just how impactful doing deliberate changes can be is with these highly sensitive
Hmm.
individuals. But on the other side of the coin, what it's doing to most kids
Not good.
and people, it's really the NPC creation machine.
100%.
I like to say, because it's distorting their reality. All of their fulfillment, all of their drive, all of their pursuit is coming from this singular device, and it makes the real world, which is full of colors and full of stimulation, just
Oh,
pale in comparison.
yeah.
So it's gray, and their thresholds of the dopamine sensitivity are completely distorted. So they become desensitized. And I think the sensitivity really, I like to talk about that a lot,
Mm.
because in the health space, everyone always like say, you become more resilient when you become healthy and all these things. But in reality, that's kind of not exactly true. I mean, it is true, but we also, more importantly, I've found when you become very connected to your environment, you're very deliberate, you become way more
Yes.
sensitive. You become able to, and not in
Intuitive.
like an emotional, sensitive way. You become highly
Yes.
intuitive. You become able to feel your environment. Your environmental sensitivity is very strong. And I actually think that's like the peak human
Hmm.
output, like the peak human, I should say, experience is like high
Yeah.
sensitivity. And the reason why so many people in society now are
Doled
just like,
out.
you look at them like, are you insane? Like, how can you not realize? It's because they're so desensitized. They don't even know any better, or they do know, but they're
What
like,
am I
oh,
going to do
whatever,
about
I mean,
it?
there's nothing
There's
I
no,
can do
I
about it.
think that's
Yeah,
the main
so
thing.
that's a real tragedy at hand, is like we're dehumanizing the entire species because we're
Yeah.
desensitizing them, and it's happening at an earlier and earlier age now. So we're really just on a
I
scary
agree.
path, I would
I
say.
agree. Yeah, it's funny that I have a lot of people in my community that they just do this really basic stuff that we talk about with light and blocking blue light, and all of a sudden they notice sounds more. I mean, I do. I never noticed how many leaf blowers were in my neighborhood, and just all the things of living in suburbia that just drive you up the wall, that it never bothered me before. I was just I never, because I was always inside, but then even when I was outside, it just you become desensitized to it. And I hear that a lot in my community, is that when you tune into the light dark cycles, do more grounding, just get outside, block blue light at night, get off the screens, that you are just a different kind of a person. You're not trying to be, but you're more in touch, you're more intuitive. And yeah, I guess I never really thought about how this layer is changing our kids to be different, completely different human beings.
It's sad because you look at children, and I haven't had kids, but I know, I have a nephew and all these things, and have seen it. It's like children are really the essence
They
of life.
are.
They're so
Yeah.
curious. They don't like, there's no boundaries to what they can do, how they think, how they feel. You just observe them, and they just like naturally want to go outside
Hmm.
barefoot, like,
Yes.
jump off a little like
Hmm.
ledge, and just like, they're just so intuitive and curious because they're trying to map their environment. And the example I love is if you give a kid like, a non-venomous like snake, they literally don't even freak out, because they're just like, oh, what is this? Like, just like hold it. Whereas the parent is like, oh my god, this snake could like kill them and all this. And the child is just like, it's like blissful ignorance, but it's actually just like really pure
Yeah.
intuitive kind of energy, that they're like, oh, this doesn't, seem like a threat. I'm kind of mapping it out, I'm seeing. And obviously that's how they learn, and eventually they'll come across real threats. But it's such a pure
Yeah.
energy, and I think it's really concerning and scary that that's being taken away from
Yeah.
us, kind of at every level with the environment. So we need a
Yeah.
change. And I think the time is right. The awareness is at an all-time high. Even the, quote unquote NPCs of the world, really,
They
they're
know.
all aware that screen time for kids
They
is,
know.
I mean, it's like 80% of parents' number one
Yeah.
issue. So if that's the number one issue for all parents, why isn't this like a political thing? Why isn't this like
Money.
talked about at every single meeting in education? Why isn't this like just the number one thing to solve? And that's of course because it's not going to be, it's
There's
not really in line with the incentives of our
right.
society,
It's
I guess
all
is a
look,
good way.
follow the money. Follow the money with our healthcare. Follow the money with our food. Follow the money with our water. Follow the money. I mean, education, everything. It's all about the money. And this is just no different. This is just another cog in the wheel of this destructive machine that people just kind of fall asleep, and just go through it because they don't think they have any other choices. But I know my community, they know they have choices. They just need information. And so, yeah, let's talk a little bit about what you guys have come up with. And ours is coming today. I'm excited to get it. I wish it had come before we talked, but I do have your other daylight, and I think it's fantastic. Uh, what are you guys doing for kids now? Because I think this is really important.
Well, yeah. So I think some of your audience is familiar with what we're doing at Daylight. Maybe not everyone, but we launched last year, and our whole mission is to build healthier technology to actually have a solution. Because as we discussed, we're not really going back to the Stone Age as much as I would like to not have any devices. They are very helpful as tools, and how do we do that? How do we bring them back to being just tools in our environment? And that's really the premise. And we think the interface that you interact with your devices is extremely important. So what we did was we invented a new display technology, and I know you
Mm-hmm.
had Unjin on the show, kind of going down that in depth last year. And it's the whole goal is to bring analog to the digital world. So what we've invented is a paper-like display, so I can see it outside here in the sun, really nice. It's kind of like a Kindle on steroids because Kindles are great, but they can only be
Mm-hmm.
used for reading. And what that unlocks is a healthier product, a healthier iPad alternative, because you now have a fully functioning paper-like display. And we went to the extents of doing things like a custom blue light free backlight, flicker free, and we have this ethos around health and wellness and productivity. So EMFs, overall workflow optimizations, all these things are in the pipeline for continuous iteration on the product side, both from a software and hardware perspective. So we're really just trying to build devices that are less so you can do more. And that went well, and we spent a lot of 2024 catching up on deliveries, and we kind of this summer for the first time sat down and we have inventory, and we realized obviously when you start a company it's always smart to focus on specific audiences. And although Daylight we believe is for everybody, we can't just start there. And we kind of sat down. I was talking to a lot more teachers, parents, etc., and we always knew we wanted to provide the best device possible for parents, for their kids, for schools. We just didn't know, of course, when it made sense to really pursue that intently and build a separate product around it. But it became pretty obvious to me being out there and talking to parents, and then seeing where we were at in here in 2025. And like I said, I didn't really know how bad it was, and I didn't have to convince anyone that screen time was a problem who worked in education, who had kids. And there's also this immense growth in
Mm-hmm.
sovereignty around education in general, of homeschooling, private schooling. Like education is actually reforming right now for the first time, probably since this kind of factory-based education model came to fruition in the early 20th century. So it really culminated in like, hey, we should just push hard on this, not only because it's going to be the best from our perspective, the timing is right, and this is
Mm-hmm.
needed so much. And we're just more passionate about it. I mean, the amount of impact I can have by getting Daylight into a family of five as their device of choice for their kids, the first device of choice, as opposed to an iPad, that is unquantifiable positive outcomes on their entire childhood, their entire rest of their lives potentially. And that gives us a lot more fulfillment. That gives us a lot larger impact in changing the trajectory overall with the relationships between everybody and their devices. And it just does a lot more in general than selling to, someone who's using it as a third device and lives in Silicon Valley, et cetera. Not that I don't love those people, but we're
Yeah.
trying to make a big impact here. And I think the largest problem to solve
Yeah.
is devices for kids, because as discussed the first, 30 minutes here, is we're not going back, and public schools are giving them out anyway. So what if we got into public schools? What if we were the first device that they got in K through 3, and they didn't get a full-blown laptop until,
Yeah.
middle school or fifth grade? And that's what we did. So we took our same hardware, blue light free, flicker free backlight, paper like device. You can use it outside, all the same, exactly the same product, but we made a kid's software version. And it's actually not that different from our own software. It just has some guardrails
Mm.
for parental controls, which of course is extremely important, because half the battle as a parent is, a fear over just them being exposed to the,
Yeah.
boundless
Yeah.
internet and what that has to potentially, corrupt your child or endanger your child. So we have very simple parental controls where you can choose up to 6 apps. So if you don't want them ever on the internet, you can simply just not choose an internet browser, and instead, of course, go for we try to curate apps that are kind of
Mhm.
lower stimulation, more educational, like Khan Academy Kids, and these like learning apps that are now becoming popular because they're not
Mm.
so fast frame, and it's really the opposite of, the most popular kind of entertainment. And you can curate that experience for your child, and also just lock it down so they don't have the ability to change that. And the other thing we've done, which is pretty cool, and we're actually going to implement on our main software as well in the next couple months here, is we block mature content, we
Nice.
block ads, we block all tracking, and we
Oh.
block social media. So the ads and tracking, we're actually going to implement that, like I said,
Ooh.
in our main operating system. So, if you sometimes go on an app, like, I mean, I think of like Candy Crush, not that I've used it more than probably once the last 5 years, but you
Yes.
always get these like pop-ups
Yeah.
and ads constantly. We found a way to actually
Mm.
kind of like block that. And a lot of these ads or sorry, a lot of these
Mhm.
apps are also collecting data. So we found a way to lessen that and block that. And that's, because we're, big
Totally.
proponents of
Yeah.
privacy and sovereignty, and especially for your children. So
Nice.
that's what we launched. It's the Daylight Kids initiative. The whole premise is it is a healthier iPad alternative. It is, in my opinion, of course, and I think in general, the best way to expose your children to the digital world. Now, I think that's always
Mhm.
going to be up to the parent on what age that is. It should always be done very progressively in small amounts over time. And really the idea is the daylight is it's a bit more boring so that the children are not
Mhm.
so enthralled in it, and it's because of the light, it's because it's monochrome grayscale, and it doesn't have the Las Vegas casino type environment, so that they can go on there.
Mhm.
They'll still love it. Trust me, a 4 or 5
Yeah.
year old, they don't care if it doesn't have color. They will be really excited, but they won't be so excited that after 20 minutes and a truck drives by, if it's a boy, or they just want to go outside
Yep.
in the backyard and play. And that's the whole goal.
Take over.
This should
Yeah.
not be taking over childhood. It's really just a supplemental tool for getting them kind of prepared for the digital world. And of course, it's a more convenient way to sketch and draw and take notes and read.
Yeah.
So that's the whole idea, right? Like, how do we bring a lower stimulation alternative to the current device suite? And so far, the feedback has been, incredible. We had early customers who just used
Mhm.
the regular daylight for their kids, and they love it. They're like, yeah, we love it for like old school cartoons. We plug in the Ethernet, they get it, as they go to bed, and they turn down the amber backlight. They actually fall asleep watching the daylight, which is an amazing kind of case study and example, anecdotally, because a normal device would
Mhm.
do the exact opposite. It would keep them up. It would disrupt their sleep. So it's been profound. It's really fulfilling, and it's exciting because we've just gotten started, literally. And we just spent a whole weekend talking to a bunch of moms, and everyone's really excited about it. And I just want to get this in front of as many families as possible, and I want to also push hard in getting this into schools, whether that's private schools, whether that's public schools. I think early education this is really important to at least acknowledge that an
I
alternative
agree.
is
Yeah,
out
I
there.
think it's so important for us to get this out to kids and control what you can. That's kind of how I look at everything now, that everyone freaks out about the skies being sprayed, and we've had the government shut down and everyone's like, wow, look how clear the skies are. I think that when we kind of hem and haw over these things, it doesn't really help. It's like, what am I doing to help my kids? I'm purifying the water, air purifiers, healthy foods, minerals. I'm trying to do all the things that I can control. And this is just another part of that, instead of, yeah, we need to talk about it. We need to open up this conversation. But I think a lot of the conversations online are very disempowering for people. It's like, oh, yeah, we're all being poisoned. Okay, so what can you do? What can you control? And this is kind of an arm of that, is like, this is what we can control with our kids, is the types of devices that they are using and exposed to. So they're not totally shut off. I would love to be off grid and never have my kid on a device ever. I would love that, but it's honestly not realistic for 95% of people. If that, and that's probably, I would say 99% of people, if not more, really. It's not going to be realistic to function in the real world. So I love this as a solution for people. And this is something that you have available now. Is it, because I'm thinking Christmas presents, holiday presents for people.
Yeah, kids. So we launched an entire new kind of segment. We have a new website, kids.daylightcomputer.com. It's available now. We have two like bundles, one with like a more protective case for kind of, 8 and under. And yeah, we're really excited. I think you kind of captured it well, is that the reality is we're, yeah, the homeschooled off-grid
Love it.
vibe
But
is not really obtainable
yeah,
for most people.
yeah.
It's aspirational.
You will.
I
I
want to
know
do
you
that, but
will.
even then, right? But even then, right? Like if you have a child, you're not going to wait until they're
No,
15 to give
they'll
them a
just be way
device.
behind.
If you're like, and guess what? If you want to have a community, they're going to want to interact with other kids and other
Right.
families, and those kids are going to be learning how to use technology. I don't know where we're going to be in 10 years, but I can tell you we're not going to be using
No.
technology less. Maybe, hopefully, if everything goes well and what we're working on, we're using
Smart.
it a lot more
Yeah.
intentionally, at least the people who value that, and we're using it
Yes.
outside more. That's another main aspect here, is like, yeah, I don't want to say, oh, the daylight works outside, you should have your 4-year old out in the backyard on the daylight.
That's
No,
going to
but
be
like if they
best.
have a homework assignment in second grade, yeah, it's better. It's like if they have to be on there and they have a homework assignment, or you want to give them reading time, it's so much better to have that optionality to be out in the sun, feet on the ground, getting
Hmm.
all of the input signals that matter, and still on the device. Whereas you could never really do that with an iPad, or it would just kind of dilute the entire experience
Hmm.
of being outside. So yeah, I think it's great. We're also very humble in the fact that we're looking for feedback, right? Like we want to support our early supporters, and hey, we want to hear from parents. We want to get into local communities. Like, what features would you like to see? What form factors? We know the Chromebook replacement is going to be like
Hmm.
a monumental thing. So we are working on a keyboard case, and that will be coming soon. And I think the kind of trajectory that we have is there's so much more we can do. It's just a matter of getting the kind of
Hmm.
first wave out there, and getting that feedback. And if you do, like yourself, have and a child with
Hmm.
ASD, like what does that look like? What can we learn from that opportunity? Because as mentioned in the beginning here, I think if we only had daylights available for the special education children or the neurodivergent children, that alone is such a
Hmm.
massive audience segment. And I think we could just impact
Yeah.
them so positively. Because from what I've learned from a couple of our early customers is that these children, especially nonverbal, they're so hard to kind of be interested in. It's so hard for them to be
Hmm.
really interested in things, and then simultaneously
Right.
not be
Right.
overstimulated. And that's the goal. And if it works for them, we know that it's going to be a much better
Yeah.
solution for
Agreed.
any
I
child.
think it's important for The young kids, like my son, I'm trying to keep him off of these, but I know I'm on borrowed time. So I'm excited to have this as an option for him when the time is right. And kids like my daughter as well. I think that they, well, I've done everything I can to protect her from the iPad, and we have guardrails on it, but I would rather her use something like this instead of the iPads. So I'm excited to try it out in our home, and I know a lot of people that are listening are going to be interested in this as well. So we'll have a link down in the show notes for everybody. And what else? Can we talk about non-native EMF super quickly and the device, because that's
Yeah,
one thing you
yeah,
mentioned
yeah, for sure.
was the lack of myelination that these kids have. And I know I've brought it up multiple times on the show of the impact of non-native EMF on our kids, that it's the blue light and also the non-native EMF they're more sensitive to and more susceptible to issues with these, right?
Absolutely. So, yeah, we talked about the blue light sensitivity. There's also still, again, they're holding the devices far closer. So, whether it's the light that we can see or it's the radio frequencies, the magnetic fields, everything is going to be higher intensity because they, in general, hold devices much closer to their bodies. And their bodies are smaller. So there has been research that's confirmed, like if a child, holds a cell phone to their head, it's like at minimum 2x greater intensity absorption into their tissues, and some tissues it's been shown to be
Mhm.
like 10x. And that I think was like at least a child that was like 6 to 10 years old. So if you want to talk about a child that's 2 to 5 years old, it could be 50x
Wow.
the impact. I mean, an infant in like a super high EMF environment. We don't really know.
Yeah.
It could be 50 to 100 times greater impact, probably because they have so much higher
Yes.
biological water content. I know your audience is
Yeah.
familiar with Pollock's work, and um, it's an antenna that's disrupting cellular signaling, that's absorbing the electromagnetic environment, the
Mhm.
mitochondria in general. They're looking to map out and signal for development, and now there's all this noise in the environment that's
Mhm.
distorting the main signal. So I think it's really unquantifiable in terms of the effects of non-native electromagnetic fields on children, in terms of how greater of an
Yep.
impact it's having on them. So absolutely, this is a really important area for us. But I also will say that it's a much more
Yeah.
challenging issue to tackle. There are some very low hanging fruit items that we are going after first. So that actually starts with a very simple feature we're calling
Mhm.
smart airplane mode. So that's actually going to launch in the next month and on the kids' devices as well, on both all daylights. But the idea is everyone who's aware of EMFs, what are you always having to do? You're always having to manually go into settings and turn your
Mhm.
device on airplane mode. Now, a lot of
Yeah.
times you're busy, you forget to do it, you realize your phone or whatever's been on the desk in front of you and you haven't used it in 10 minutes,
Mhm.
or your laptop or whatever, a daylight. And what people don't realize is these devices are actually pinging the Wi-Fi network. If it's your phone, the Wi-Fi, the
Bluetooth. The
cellular, and the
Bluetooth is
Bluetooth.
crazy. I had no
They're
idea until I had someone come in my office and they were like, I don't understand. You're on the Ethernet, you're hardwired. I don't get it. You're not plugged
mm-hmm.
in. And then it was the Bluetooth that was just making this meter go completely bananas.
It's like your phone at any time can really be pinging like 5 to 10
Right.
different frequency bands in the radio frequency range. So that's why airplane mode, properly turning it on and killing all of that, is the best solution. And if you're not using a
Right. You
device
don't need to have
actively,
Bluetooth.
there is no need
No.
for any of that. For
Right.
Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, etc. So the daylight, the first feature we're coming out with is called Smart Airplane Mode, and it's just going to be really simple in that if the device is in standby for a couple minutes, it will
Nice.
go into airplane mode. So if it's just sitting there, like on your couch next to your children or next to you, and you're not even using it,
Nice.
it'll be in airplane mode. Now that's step one, and then throughout the next months, we're going to keep iterating on that. We need to test it, and of course understand what's going on. But most of the EMF optimization in the radio frequency range is going to come from firmware and software optimizations like that. So the next step would be, okay, when you're in your Reader app or your Kindle app, you could either have an option, or your daylight might even just automatically go into airplane mode if you're in that same screen for more than, let's say, a few minutes. We're going to have
Mm.
to figure out the details. But how many things do you do on, a computer or daylight, especially when it's like note taking, it's sketching, it's reading, and then especially for children, so many of the things they might end up doing, like a lot of the kids are always just, they're
Mhm.
kind of like sketching on it or drawing, or it's really not needed
Right.
to be connected to the internet, especially Bluetooth. So how do we make a software feature that just turns it off automatically, even if you're using it, depending on the end application? So that's the next step. And then in parallel would also be having a
Mm.
low EMF mode. In general, you don't really need
Mm.
the peak output power of the Wi-Fi, of the cellular data transmission for 90% of what you do. And I will say that big tech is
Mm.
also working on this,
Interesting.
and I'll get to that in a second, for a different reason. It's not a
Oh.
health reason, it's actually a battery reason. Um, but imagine you're watching a YouTube video, or you're just like Googling something. The difference in like output power needed of the Wi-Fi transmission is
Mm.
is drastic. So what we're going to create is low EMF mode. So when stuff like that happens, or maybe it'll be just a part of the smart EMF kind of system that we create, is that in general, the peak output will be severely capped, unless you say you're like watching a YouTube video, or you could just toggle low EMF mode on, and it'll be far reduced. Because we know a few things about EMFs. We don't know a ton, but we know that in general, although it's not always linear, the higher the output radiation typically has
Yeah.
more adverse effects, especially in the radio frequency range. Magnetic fields are a bit more complicated, but then the duration of the exposure is really the key. So if we can reduce the amount of duration in terms of exposure to being far less by having smart features, by turning the Wi-Fi off at nighttime, things like that, and all the devices, then that's going to be paramount for having a better EMF environment. And of course, this is the shorter term. Long term, I have a lot of fun ideas. I mean, future products will be optimized both at a software and a hardware level, but it's kind of getting started. And as I mentioned, there's mutual, or multiple, I should say, benefits of doing this. The battery life will be longer. And I do like to say, ironically, I think if battery technology was like 10x to what it was right now, I think a lot of us would have
Yeah.
brain
Yeah.
cancer or a lot
Yeah.
more severe health issues. Because you think about the
Mhm.
early cell phones,
Yeah.
right? Like, they were bricks. They had way higher output power, and I've cited things like the Interphone study from the early 2000s, where they looked at like millions of cell phone users, and they did find a statistically significant increased risk of brain cancer for quote unquote
Wow.
the heaviest users. The heaviest users back then were greater than 30 minutes a
Wow.
day, I think. However, and people look at that and they'll be like, well, we're
Yeah.
using it for 8 hours a day now. And that is
Yeah.
true, or more. And that is true. But the phones back then were way different than the phones now. And the output power
Mhm.
is much different today. And I think it's one of our only saving graces is that batteries, we keep shoving more stuff into our devices. And now with AI, it's like we're even further behind the capability of the device versus the battery technology. So that's something that's a really interesting conversation, and I think we should be all thankful that battery is a limiting factor. Else, I
Yeah.
think we would be blasted with much, much, much higher output power. So, anyway, I think the premise is we got a couple basic features coming soon on EMF optimization. We love it when people hardwire. You can get a USB-C
Nice.
to Ethernet adapter and go no wireless. That is the absolute best
Yeah.
way, especially for your kids. Um, and I will say, hardwiring your internet is a pain. Even in my house, like the Spectrum Wi-Fi router I have, you used to be able to just type in the IP address of your Wi-Fi router
Mhm.
and disable the antennas. You can't always do that anymore, for whatever reason. But so, for example, in my house, I'm always hardwired into my laptop, into my daylight. because it's twofold in terms of your EMF exposure. You have the EMF exposure from
Mhm.
the actual router, the source that's
And then
being
the
dispersed
device.
throughout your whole
Yeah.
house if it's wireless, but then you have the device as well. And the device is just as important
Right.
because it's right next to you. And
Right.
distance means everything for EMFs. So at worst, if you don't want to like hardwire your whole house or have the kind of ability to do that, you can always plug an
Use the
Ethernet
router.
cable and run both at the same time, or just for your kids. So, say the only time your kids can use the daylight or whatever, you can keep your Wi Fi on. You can just get like a 30 or
Yeah.
20 or 50-foot Ethernet cable, plug it into the router, and only have the daylight or whatever device you have even on Ethernet for your children.
Yeah.
That's for sure what I would do, because I understand that it's often
Yeah.
extremely inconvenient for people to
Yeah.
hardwire their whole house. And then that's really the only time they're getting that internet or that device would be a much
Yeah.
lower footprint.
I love that
So
idea for people
yeah,
because it
that's kind of how
when
we're
we moved
thinking
in,
about
I
it.
had the house hardwired, and I've spent probably like $2,500 to continue to add more cables and run cables through the house. It's a it's a 3-story house, and we've got ports on all 3 levels now. But it took a lot of visits and money and time, and not everyone can do that. And it's yeah, so that's a really great option for people as well. I love that you mentioned that.
Yeah, it's gonna only get, I think, more creative in terms of the solutions we put out, and more effective. But it's
Mhm.
a challenge for all of us, right? And there's no perfect electromagnetic
Yeah.
environment anymore. It's not even
Mm-mm.
remotely possible. So it's just kind of how do we mitigate the distance? How do we mitigate the duration of intensity, especially for the children at the earlier the age and the younger they are, the more
Yeah.
important that is. So, and I've measured things that absolutely blew my mind. Like a lot of families, just talking on this topic,
Oh,
they have cameras, they have baby monitors, and I
crazy.
highly recommend buying an EMF meter and
Yeah.
looking into them, because most of those cameras are Bluetooth, and they're increasing the exposure. And then the baby monitors, the cameras. I actually was on Danny Jones' podcast and went to his house before and measured it, and his wife was sleeping right next to this baby monitor because, of
Check
course,
it.
she wanted to,
Yeah.
have the immediate accessibility. And that thing was not even pulsed output; it was a continuous output that was basically like
Oh my
sleeping next
gosh.
to a Wi-Fi router with 3 inches. It was actually more intense. The radio frequency output was even higher because it wasn't pulsating on and off like your Wi-Fi is. It was continuous, like extremely high levels right next to her head on her bedstand. And I highly recommend that parents
Hmm.
and families think about this stuff, especially I know the
I
newborns, it's
couldn't do
really
it.
important.
My son
But
slept
if you
with
can even,
us, and then
yeah, there you go. I'm not going to tell people how to, parent, because that's their decisions. But think about this. Think about like what's in your
right.
environment as a family, and can you put more distance? Can you get cameras that actually hardwire instead of use Bluetooth or Wi-Fi? Can you turn a circuit
Yeah.
breaker in the bedroom off at night, because that has an impact on the
Yeah.
magnetic and electric field exposure? Can you think about like doing the hardwire solution for screen
It
time? All of
does.
that stuff does matter, I would say.
Tech wellness, I know. Just I always send people over there. August has a great like DIY for baby monitor video camera. I've had to hardwire that. If you really need to do that, that she has that set up. But I don't know. I never did it with my son. I didn't even have like a baby monitor. We just like left the doors kind of open at night. We just listen out.
Nice.
I mean, he's been up since 5 this morning. He knows how to wake us up if he needs us. I know, again, everyone has a different life situation and maybe bigger house than me, and different comfort level, but I don't know. I could, knowing what I knew, I just knew that the video monitors and all those things, like, we could do without them. And so, yeah, just the more you know, right?
Yeah, and I feel like it's a confidence thing, right? Like you brought up earlier in the show that it's
Yes.
like all this
Yes.
fear exists out there, but like, and I can't even imagine as a mom, Like, I think that's a
Yes.
very predatory marketing behavior, but you kind of get feared into all of these things. Like, you need
The
a baby
outlet
monitor, you need
sock that they
this, you
put on
need that.
babies.
Yeah, everything
Yeah.
like the
Oh,
night lights. I mean, that could disrupt their sleep. Obviously there's better
yeah.
night lights than others, like all of these things. And of course you just want what's best and what's
Right.
safest for your children. And oftentimes it's, you know,
It
it
is.
is a very predatory
It is.
marketing behavior. So it's concerning, but I think that's where community is really big. And, you know, sharing successes and routines and practices that are working. And that's also something we're trying to do at Daylight. We're starting like a Daylight Kids blog. I want to do a Facebook page for kind of families and moms that are living this deliberate lifestyle, because we know that you know, our device is only
Mhm.
one aspect of it. Like it's really the play based, nature based,
Yes.
deliberate lifestyle of childhood that is the most important thing. And how do you foster that? Because everyone's got a different, you know, setup, a way of thinking about it. There's the education styles, like more Montessori, or, you know, the
Steiner.
Waldorf folks
We're
are
in
like
Rudolph
way, you know,
Steiner school, which is
anti-tech. And then
very interesting nature
Steiner, yeah,
school.
yeah.
Yeah. It's
Well, is he
ish. Yeah.
Waldorf
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, we're
It's
inspired
very
by that. Yeah.
interesting. There's parts of it that I'm like, perhaps we don't, but okay. You have to yeah. Yeah. But I think a lot of people are very interested in that, and the people that I meet at that school are very interesting people. Um, because we do share these visions for our children of not going into something that we see as harmful for our kids, you know, and trying to do better. So it's definitely a conversation I think that people are wanting to have more and more of. They just need resources that are not, like you said, fear-based, right?
Yeah, and again, we know that getting the
Yes.
kids outside as much as possible, so it's the most
Yeah.
important thing. And there's research, if you care about that, to prove that, but it's also just like kind of obvious, I think. But
It
it's
is.
challenging to do so.
It
That's
is.
it's really the hard part. Is like the thought of all of this is pretty simple. It's just like, how do
Right.
you execute? What's the right school to go to? And that's where the community, I feel like, is very important. And as mentioned, I do feel like education
It
is
is.
actually reforming. There's more micro schools,
Yes.
there's more homeschooling. I want to mention that if your audience, anyone is homeschooling, there's now
Wow.
state funded
I've heard of
programs that
this.
exist, called ESA's Education Savings Account. I think Georgia has one. I don't know
I know
if
Florida does, South Carolina
I don't know.
does.
It's Florida definitely does. Arkansas. Anyway, what they do is they give
They have
you
like
like
ten
a
thousand
lot of money
dollars
per
per
kid per
child,
year.
something like that.
It Yeah, it's like five to 10 grand. It ranges. If you have a special needs or ASD
Yeah.
child, it can be even more. And what you can do is, when you're part of that program, you can sign up and actually get reimbursed or use that money for
Yeah.
curricula based activities, and anywhere from like going to a national park and get reimbursed for that too. Daylight, we're actually
Oh,
approved in at least 8 to 9
cool.
states currently, which is awesome. And we're here in Utah talking to a lot of parents, and it really lowers the barrier to entry. There's other platforms that do a similar thing, a bit different, called
Hmm.
Open Ed, that I've talked to in states like California. There's like charter or grant money. So there's definitely more opportunity now, and I'm really excited to
Yeah.
see this space grow. But yeah, I would urge any, you know, parents, families, especially with young children, to kind of explore
Resources.
these, you
Yeah.
know, communities, options, and resources, because that's going to provide you the most empowerment
Yeah.
to be able to raise your family in the way you want to,
Yeah.
because it is a challenge, and
It is.
daycare is expensive, and the
Not good.
quality is
Yeah. With
usually
my
pretty
son's
poor.
nature
So
school, we
it's
do probably pay,
overall,
I know we pay a lot more than my sisters that they send their kids to daycare, but they start the first 2 hours of the day outside. Even even if it's raining, they have like rain gear for
wow.
them to go out. Obviously not a torrential downpour. They're not going to do that to the kids, but every morning, you know, he's here. We're outside eating breakfast. We're doing our routine. And then I know we go in the car, we roll the windows down, sunroof open. He gets there. We walk out to the play area where all the kids are outside. They don't go inside until 10 a.m. And for me, knowing what I know, and they don't use overhead lights, I was like, wow, this is amazing. Again, I don't agree on everything that they do, but that's a different conversation. Those things to me are those are my values, and I think that there's more of us out here. So I love these conversations and hope that this spreads, gets out there to people so they know that they do have options. And that's the most important thing
Absolutely.
is the empowerment portion.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, we're looking to learn from the community, from parents. So don't hesitate to reach out to us at Daylight. But we're also looking to get, like, if you are in
Yes.
public schools, we're gonna launch, and it should be up by the time this pod is out. But we're just gonna launch a landing page with a form, kids.daylightcomputer.com/education, where even if you don't know if your school is open to it, you can provide a point of contact, you can provide feedback. We're really looking to get into schools, and we're looking to
Nice.
run pilot programs with at least 10, maybe 15 schools where we provide enough daylights for a whole classroom, ideally K through 4, and build success stories, because we know this is going to be a better option for teachers and for students in the future. And yeah, schools are very
Yeah.
decentralized to the local communities, so we need just some inroad. And I'm sure at least some teachers listen to this, and I'm sure everyone knows someone in the education community. So if you feel very strongly, don't hesitate to reach out or fill out that information, because I think that's the big opportunity at hand here, is to really try and change those early interactions with
Yeah.
tech for kids, because we can do as much at home, but the public schooling environment, which is the vast majority of our population, is, in my opinion, still going to be a detriment. And some of these schools are very open. I'm actually very surprised
Yeah.
at how open they are. And if we can change the devices and improve the lighting,
Amazing.
wow, we could have an
Amazing.
entirely different society, like
Let's
almost
get the
overnight, I think,
let's get
in
these
terms
fluorescent lights out, crack some windows, get some lamps in there and daylights, let's and get them outside. I mean, oh, that's just the heartbreaking thing is that you don't want your kids stuck in a room all day. You want them outside. So more of this. And you never know who's listening. So anybody listening, that form, and I'll send that out in my email. We'll put it in the show notes. Pass it along. I underestimate sometimes who's listening to the show. So pass it along to whoever you know who might want to get involved in some way. So
Yeah, and feel free to email me. It's just Tristan@dailycomputer.com. If you have ideas, thoughts, feedback, want to be a part of it in terms of, helping get this in your community. We're also looking to get into libraries, because we think that's going to be an awesome place to demo. And, kids should be going
yeah,
back to the libraries, and learning and reading books. And we realize it's a very on brand thing for us. But, or, anyone who's
yeah,
engineering background and has ideas on how to even improve, EMFs and devices, etc. Very, very open minded. And I think that's what it's going to take is a community led kind of adoption of better solutions across the electromagnetic spectrum for our kids, because else, we're just going to have more of the same. And
it's not.
right now, that's
It's
not good
not.
enough.
Well, I feel like we could continue talking for at least another hour. But everyone, make sure you head down to the show notes for those links. And Tristan, awesome conversation. Appreciate you for being here. And I'm excited to use our kids' daylight tablet. I will report back.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Sarah.